Hi, I'm Piyush Roy, President of the Entrepreneurship Development Cell. In this video, we will explore the powerful hook model, a framework that helps build habit-forming products. This will be especially useful for entrepreneurs looking to create products that customers return to again and again. So how do we get people hooked to our products and services? And so what I wanted to do is to help you identify these patterns that we see identified time and time again in habit forming products. So you can use these techniques in your own products or services. I want to dive right in by getting us all on the same page around what is a habit. We want our product to be habit forming. What does that actually mean? A habit is nothing more than an impulse to do a behavior with little or no conscious thought. It is about half of what you do every single day in and day out. Is done out of habit. These behaviors that we do with little or no conscious thought. A habit is not an addiction. There is a big difference between an addiction, which is always harmful. Habits can be very good for us. And so what we want to do is to help use these habits for good. We want to help people build happier, healthier, more connected, more productive lives by helping them form good habits. So don't tell me you are trying to build an addictive product. Addictions are always built. We want to build habits. Habits can be used for good. And there is an explosion of companies these days that are using this hook model. Companies like Fitbot are getting people hooked to exercise. Companies like Kahoot are getting kids hooked to online education. We can use the hook model. Financial services products are getting people hooked to saving money. There is all kinds of ways we can build healthy habits in people's lives by getting them hooked to healthy habits. The way we do this is we use what is called the hook model. The hooked model is nothing more than an experience designed to connect your user's problem to your problem with enough frequency to form an habit. And it is through successive cycles. Through these hooks, this is how our preferences are shaped, how our tastes are formed, and how these habits take hold. So what we are going to do for the next few minutes is walk you through how to build your hook model for your product and services. How can you design your product experience in such a way that you increase the likelihood of forming a new consumer habit? And to do that, we have to make sure that users work through these four basic steps every time they interact with our product or services. They have to go through the trigger, the action, the reward, and finally the investment phase. So let's dive right in. Triggers are the first step of the hook model. And there are two kinds of triggers. The first kind of trigger is what we call an external trigger. External triggers help us and tell us what to do next with some kind of information in our environment. Something in the outside environment. So it's a ping, it's a ding, a ring, anything in the outside environment that tell us some piece of information for what to do next. Click here, buy now, play this, anything in the outside world that gives you information for what to do. Now, external triggers. You will be very familiar with, right? We in the design community, we know all about external triggers. You see them every day as a consumer. But what product people and what entrepreneurs don't think about enough and what actually turns out to be incredibly important for it, like to form a habit forming perspective, is to create an association with what we call an internal trigger. An internal trigger, unlike an external trigger that provides you information in your outside environment, an internal trigger gives you information for what to do next by creating an association or a memory inside the user's own head. So what we do when we are around certain people, certain places, situations, routines, and most frequently, when we experience certain emotions prompt us to do the next action, to do the behavior out of habit, out of little or no conscious thought. The most frequently occurring internal triggers are these emotions, but not just any emotions. They're negative emotions. So what we do when we are feeling lost, bored, fearful, stressed, anxious, fatigued. When we feel these uncomfortable emotional states, we look for relief. We look for something to scratch that itch, that uncomfortable emotional state. So the goal of a habit forming product is to associate itself with that internal trigger. If you don't believe me, it turns out the studies have found that people who are suffering from clinical depression check mail more often. Now, why would that be? Think for a minute. Why would people suffering from clinical depression check mail more? It's not the mail that is making them depressed. It is actually the fact that people who are suffering from clinical depression experience what we call negative valence state. They feel down more often in their day-to-day lives, and they go on the web. They check mail. They check email. They look at their app more frequently than the rest of the population. But if we are honest with ourselves, we all do this, right? Every product or service you use for one reason. And that one reason is to modulate your mood, to make you feel something different. Let me ask you, where do people go when they are feeling lonely, when they are seeking connection? Where do they go? Well, for many people, they check Facebook. And what about when you are unsure about something? Before you scan your brain to see if you know the answer, you are instantly Googling it, right? Out of little or no conscious thought, out of habit. And what about when you are feeling bored in the afternoon? You know, between 2 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you have that big project you don't want to work on right now. What do? Maybe you hop on over to YouTube or Reddit or check stock prices, the crypto markets, Reddit, television. That is lots and lots of solutions to the uncomfortable emotional state of boredom. We don't like that feeling of boredom, and we look for relief with that products and services that we use. So, what is the lesson here? The lesson here is if you are building a habit forming product, if your business relies on unprompted user engagement, you want people to use the habit on their own. Out of habit, you have got to be able to tell me what is your internal trigger. I can't tell you how many product teams I work with over the years who tell me about all the amazing ways, bang, incredible technology features that their product can do. But when I ask them, okay, but what is the consumer's itch? What is the psychological pain point? They don't have a clue. And if you don't know what that psychological itch is, you are flying blind. You are just hoping to get lucky. You have got to be able to articulate what that internal trigger is so that you can build a solution for it. I mean, what is so awesome about the work that we all do for a living is that we got to solve people's pain. How awesome is that, right? Like, other than a doctor, how many professions solve people's pain? I mean, that is what we do for a living. We are so lucky that we have those kind of jobs. And so this is an absolutely critical step. If you're designing a product or service for your entrepreneurship journey that you want to become a habit, you have got to be able to know what internal trigger you are solving for. Now, there is a lot more to be said about triggers, but for the sake of time, let's move on to the next step of the hook model, the action phase. The action phase is refined. It is redefined as the simplest behavior done in anticipation of a reward. The simplest thing the user can do to get relief from that discomfort. Let me show you a few habit forming products. I want you to see how easy that key behavior is. Something as simple as a scroll. Okay, on Pinterest or AC or any number of sites, just that scroll. Or what about a quick Google search, right? How easy is that? Or how about just pushing the play button on YouTube or Netflix? Very easy behavior done in anticipation of a reward. And it is actually a formula that helps us design for these singular behaviors that comes to us from a psychologist at Stanford, naming BJ Fogg. He tells us that for any human behavior, we need three things at the same time. For any behavior, online, offline, doesn't matter. We need motivation, that is the M. We need ability. Ability is how easy or difficult anything is to do. And the trigger, let us T for trigger. We just talked all about triggers, so let's talk about M and motivation and ability. Motivation is designed as the energy for action by Edward Diesel, the father of self-determination theory. The energy for action, how much we want to do a particular behavior. And here we have these 6 levers of motivation that we can pull on to make a behavior more or less likely to occur. Because all of us as human beings, we seek pleasure. We avoid pain. We seek hope. We avoid fear. We seek social acceptance. We avoid social rejection. So, when it comes to motivation, one industry that masters these elements of motivation is, of course, the advertising industry. So, for every television commercial, every radio spot, every banner ad you have ever seen fundamentally utilizes these six levers of motivation to make a behavior more likely to occur. But what is actually more important than motivation is ability, which is defined as the capacity to do a particular action, how easy or difficult something is to do. And here are again, we have these six levers that we can pull on to make a behavior easier, to make a behavior more or less likely to occur based on these six factors of ability. Time, how much time something takes has an impact on how likely people are to do the behavior. How much money something costs, how much physical effort is required to do a behavior. Brain cycles, this is a big one when it comes to tech products, because the harder something is to understand, the less likely people are to do that behavior. We call this cognitive load. So the easier you can make something to understand, the more likely people are to do it. Social deviance says that we become more likely to do something when we see the other people like us doing it. And finally, non-routine says that we become more likely to do something simply for the fact that we have done it before in the past. Now, how does this work? The more we do a particular behavior, the easier it becomes, the more likely we are to do it again in the future. What do we call this? This is called practice, right? The more we do it, the easier it gets. The more likely we are to do it again and again. So we can actually use these three factors on this conceptual model. This is really, really helpful. So in your product areas, when the user has sufficient motivation and sufficient ability, they cross that red threshold. But only if a trigger is present will the behavior occur. Online, offline, enterprise, consumer web, it doesn't matter. Your behavior, your kids' behavior, your customers' behavior, every click, every action, every transaction requires these three things: motivation, ability, and a trigger every single time. If the behavior is not occurring, it is because one of these three things are missing. Okay, so that's a brief overview of the action phase. Let's move on to the reward phase. The reward phase is where the user gets what they came for, where their itch is scratched a little bit. Now, when we talk about rewards, we have to talk about the brain. And in particular, there is a way to supercharge this, to supercharge desire. That in fact, there is a way to essentially plug in into people's brain and manufacture desire. Does anybody want to know how to manufacture desire? Is anybody curious? Well, I'm doing it to you right now. And when I took that long pause and I stopped talking, some of you perked up. Wait, what is this guy going to say? Why is not he talking anymore? What is the answer to the question? And so what I just did was to utilize what is called a variable reward, because the unknown is fascinating. By taking that pause and changing my cadence and asking you an unknown question, you want to know more. You focus, you engage, what is going on here? And so that unknown, that variability causes us to engage. It causes us to focus, and it is highly habit forming. This was first discovered by the work of B.F. Skinner, the father of operant conditioning. He took these pigeons back in the 1950s and he put them in a box that today we call a Skinner box. He gave this pigeon the opportunity to peck at this little disc whenever they were hungry. What many people don't know is that Skinner stopped his pigeons. These pigeons were very hungry, because if the pigeons were not hungry, they would not peck at the disc to get the food pellet. Just like you can't make our customers or users do what we want them to do, click our buttons, unless they have that need. So if the pigeons didn't have that internal trigger of hunger, they didn't peck at the disc to get a reward. But if they were hungry, just like if our users, our customers are hungry, if they have that internal trigger, then they might be receptive to take an action, to believe, to relieve that internal trigger. So in this case, Skinner could very quickly train his pigeons to pack at the desk and get a food pallet. Great. That's called operant conditioning. No big deal. If you have a puppy at home or kids at home, you probably have trained someone or something is behavior based on giving a reward for a particular behavior. That is nothing special. What is special is that one day Skinner walked into his lab and realized he didn't have enough of these food pellets. He couldn't afford to give these pigeons a treat, a little reward every time they packed at the disc. He could only afford to give it to them once in a while. So sometimes the pigeons would pack at the desk, no reward, no food pallet. The next time the pigeon would pack at the desk, they would receive a order. And here's the cool part. What Skinner observed was that when the reward was given on a variable schedule of reinforcement, the pigeon packed more often. They were more engaged when there was variability involved in this phenomenon. And so, in all sorts of products, online, offline, enterprise, consumer web, it doesn't matter. You will always find one or more of these three types of variable rewards in every habit forming products. Rewards of the tribe, rewards of the hunt, and rewards of the self. Let me introduce these to you briefly. Rewards of the tribe are things that feel good, that have this element of variability and come from other people. This is about the search for empathetic joy, feeling good because someone else feels good, partnership, cooperation, competition, all these things have this element of variability. This element of the unknown, feel good, and come from other people. Best example online is social media. So when you check WhatsApp or TikTok or Facebook or Slack, any of these tools have an element of variable reward that comes from other people. What do people post? What are their reactions? How many likes does something get? High degree of variability in the form of rewards of the tribe. The next type of variable is what we call rewards of the hunt, which stems from our primal search for resources, material possession, and in modern society, information. Now, when people think of variable rewards, they oftentimes think of gambling, right? They think about the variability that comes with playing one of these games of chance, right? When you pull on a slot machine or play a roulette wheel, nobody stops watching a turning roulette wheel. You want to see what the outcome is going to be. You want to see if you might win one of these game of chances. We see the exact same psychology at work online. Consider the feed. Why is it that almost everything these days has a feed, right? All these products, especially on mobile, all have this feed mechanic. But what is it about the feed? Well, let's take LinkedIn. For example, when you open up LinkedIn, the world's largest professional content site, when you open up LinkedIn, you were never quite sure what you were going to see. Okay, maybe the first story is interesting, or maybe the second story is interesting. No. How about the third or fourth? What do you have to do to see more interesting content? You have to keep swiping and swiping and scrolling. And that scrolling uses the exact same psychology as pulling on a slot machine, searching and searching for that next reward of the hunt. Finally, the last type of variable reward is what we call reward of the self. Rewards of the self are things that feel good, that have this element of variability. These are things that are intrinsically pleasurable. These are all about the search for mastery, completion, competency, and control. And the best example I can think of online is, of course, gameplay. So when people play Candy Crush or Angry Birds or any number of other games, they're not really necessarily playing with other people in many cases. They're not winning anything in terms of material possession. And yet there is something fun and exciting about getting to the next level, the next accomplishment, the next achievement. Now I know everybody listening right now, you are all very serious business people. You don't play these games, right? Well, I bet you play this game every single day. How about this? Does this look familiar? Your email inbox, right? Email is probably the mother of habit forming technology. Think about it. It has rewards of the tribe. Who is the message from? Is it good news? Did you get fired? Did that market go up, down, right? What information is in your inbox that you might want to check? And then it has rewards of the self. That mythical search for this magical place called Inbox Zero. That quest to read your messages, to clear them away. Or perhaps, if you think about your to-do list, checking off items that involve rewards of the self. Or the thing that always gets me is when you want to clear your home screen on your phone so that you can finally clear it away. It is all about this search for mystery, consistency, competence, and control. Now the point of variable reward phase is to scratch the user's itch, to give them what they came for. There always has to be a connection and yet leave them wanting more. So remember, the internal trigger has to be scratched in the variable reward phase. So if the internal trigger is loneliness, well, then we have to connect people together. But if it's something else, let's say it's workplace stress, then the variable reward has to give people certainty and assurance. So don't try and use just some classic gamification techniques like points and badges and leaderboards unless they are applied appropriately. You have to make sure that the itch is scratched in the variable reward phase to give people what they want, but again leave them wanting more. A little bit of uncertainty around what they might find the next time they engage with the product. Finally, the investment phase. The investment phase is probably the most overlooked of the 4 steps of the hook model. The investment phase is where the people put something into the product to increase the likelihood of the next part through the hook. Investments do this in 2 ways. The first way is loading the next trigger. Loading the next trigger involves the user doing something themselves to bring themselves back. Something that I do to bring myself back. Not some piece of spammy advertising or messaging, but something that I did intentionally so that I will come back in the future. Let me give you an example. When you use WhatsApp and you send someone a message, there is no immediate reward. There is no points, there is no badges, there is no leaderboards, nothing really happens. When you send someone a message, other than the fact that when you send that message, you are investing in the platform. And you will likely load the next trigger because you are going to get a reply. That reply, what is that on your screen right now? An example of an external trigger that prompts you through the hook. Once again, the first way that investments increase the likelihood of the next path through the hook is by loading the next trigger, bringing the user back by something that they themselves did. The next way that investments increase the likelihood of the next path through the hook is by storing value. Storing value is a really big deal in the history of manufacturing when it comes to products that are made out of atoms rather than things that are made out of bits. Everything in the physical world depreciates with wear and tear. When you think about your clothing, your car, your couch, all these things lose value with wear and tear. The more you use them, the less they're worth. Habit forming products do the opposite. They don't depreciate, they appreciate. They get better and better. So for example, the more content you drop to a service like Dropbox or Google Drive, the more valuable it becomes as your cloud stored solution. The more data you give a service, for example, Mint.com or any number of other services out there that use your financial information, the more data you give them, the better the service becomes. So that if you were to log into these services on my account, it actually would not be that interesting for you. For example, think about if you log into my Facebook account or my Twitter account. That information has been tailored based on the data I have given those companies just for me, based on my test for a market size of 1 because of the investment that I have made in those products in the form of my data. Followers. The more followers someone has, the better the product becomes. So think about with Twitter. For example, if Twitter tomorrow were to say, hey, Twitter is not free anymore, okay? You have to pay for Twitter. What is more likely to keep using Twitter? Who is more likely to keep using Twitter? Is it gonna be someone with 10 followers or someone with 10,000 followers? Of course, it is going to be the people with 10,000 followers because they have stored all this value in the form of their follower count. And finally, reputation. Reputation is a form of stored value that users can literally take to the bank because my reputation on Upwork or eBay or Airbnb determines what I can charge for my goods and services and how likely am I to leave once I have accrued all this positive reputation. Kind of hard to do. The product is suddenly very sticky. I'm not going to go to a different product, even if it's better, because I've stored all this positive reputation in one of these services. Which brings me to this cold hard conclusion that you have been probably told a lie when it comes to your entrepreneurship journey. You have probably been told something along the lines, just build the best product and you will win, right? Build a better mousetrap and the world will be the path to your door. I'm here to tell you that it is not true. That Silicon Valley graveyards are full of companies that had the best technology. Having great technology is not enough. That is table stakes. So if you're building a habit forming product, this is the most important part of the presentation. You have got to be able to answer these 5 fundamental questions. Number 1, what is the internal trigger that your product is addressing? What external trigger prompts the user to use? What is the simplest action in the anticipation of a reward? Is the reward fulfilling and yet leaves the user wanting more? And then finally, what is the bit of work done to increase the likelihood of the next part to the hook? So the point of the hook model is to get you to ask yourself the right question to build better product hypothesis.